Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more.
But I always ask people about their name and how it's spelled. So let's start off with your name. And could you spell it, please?
Full name, Jill
Yeah.
Law.
Okay.
Jill Law. Very brief, very short.
Very short. I mean, your email address ought to be just as short, too.
Tough to get things like that. I waited a long time to get my website because somebody else had it. An actual law firm had.
I was just thinking of that, yeah. Law firms jumping on top of that.
Right.
It's, well, there's no fun there.
No.
But do you have any stories about people? You never know how people react to your name. Today I had a doctor's office call me up, and they were calling me Roland, and I said, that's my dad's name. And okay, truth be told, it's my middle name. She's like, oh, it's Ronald. Yes. Oh, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Fortier. No.
No. I don't get a lot of questions because it's such a simple name.
Yeah.
It couldn't be any easier to pronounce or realize what it is. No.
As we get rolling, I just wanted to let you know that, and I also tell this to nearly everyone, this is not a one and done, meaning just before we started rolling, you wear a lot of hats. I wear a lot of hats. A lot of artists wear a lot of hats.
Mm-hmm.
So we can talk about you and your practice, your painting practice.
Yes.
It's a word that's being used more and more and more, and it's kind of interesting. Or we could talk about your other pursuits. Or we could talk about all of them, whatever happens.
Wherever you
no
want to
agendas,
go.
no
Right,
agendas.
No agenda.
So when did you know you wanted to be an artist? It's always a good starting place.
Adolescent, child, I always loved to draw, color, paint, so I knew right off the bat that I would somehow be an artist someday. And I took all art classes in high school, and that was my only reason to go to school, was to go to art class. And I had tremendous teachers, Beulah Hong and Tony Domingos at Old Rochester many years ago, back in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s. They were just fantastic. They took the class to Chicago. We went to New York City, went to Boston often. So they were very inspirational. And I thought at that time I would be an art teacher. That was the game plan. And then things evolved. I started working as a teenager, and that just continued and did not end up going to school. And I had wanted to go to Swain School when I had applied and got accepted, but finances didn't come through, and here we are today, 50 years later.
And no letters after your name.
No letters after my name.
Yeah.
No.
There's a new trend, and it's starting to get to be, I don't know if, let's use it controversial there's a movement who believes that the self-taught is the best taught. And, it goes back and forth. The academics shrivel just hearing that. What are your thoughts on the whole thing?
I think getting a degree is a good thing to do. If I had the time, I'd go back to school. I did go back. I was my career for the first half of my life was as a chef, and I started cooking when I was very young, 14 or 15.
Where did you cook?
I started at a place in Mattapoisett called the Trading Post, which eventually burned down. I was a kid. I was a child. I was 14, and I was working in the kitchen. And then I worked at Catanset Club in Marion during the summers. And then once I got out of the house, married and all, I worked at the Days Inn for a few years. Then I went from there, and I think in 82 or so, I was the chef at the Candleworks, way back when Maurice Jaspe had just started it up.
A world away from the everyday.
Yes. So I stayed there for a while, and then I my husband got laid off from his job, so we moved to Florida for 1 year, and I was a sous chef down there at a country club. So limited exposure as far as public and so on. But it was a great gig. We had a lot of culinary students there, graduates, so that was fun. And then came back because that didn't pan out for him.
No pun intended.
Right, and he wanted to work, so we came back to New Bedford and bought a house in New Bedford and stayed there for a while, and then bought a house in Dartmouth, and we've been there for 30-some years. And in the interim, I had odd jobs. I worked at the sail loft, when the original sail loft.
Were you
in
there
Paderborn.
when Jasper, was that his name, Jasper?
Foster Herman?
No, well, Foster Herman, that's a
Right.
whole, that's
That's
an
a
entire,
different
that's
story.
like 10 podcasts.
Yes.
But no,
Absolutely.
the chef, the head chef there, he used to come. I knew your name sounded familiar, and I kept thinking, no, maybe because it's such a simple name, but we probably crossed paths or ran parallel paths because I started off at Gulf Hill Parlor, cooking there, and I was there when they opened up the twin silos. And while I
wow.
was cooking there, he was an African American chef. And that was also back in the day when you didn't see that many African Americans in kitchens up here. I mean, it sounds like kind of crazy because in some parts of the state, I mean, they're the majority, not the minority.
Right.
But he was the kindest, most gentlest man. And he'd come up for his order on Sundays because we didn't deliver on Sundays down to the sail loft. And we'd sit there, and and he'd teach me a couple of things, and it was it was good memories there.
No, I don't recall him. When I
Yeah.
went in there, I think they had closed for renovations.
Probably
Per
after
se.
he left.
And-
I heard a lot of stories too.
And so that's when I came in, and I was there for, I think, a couple of years anyway. And then I went, well, I had worked when it was the Holiday Inn, I had worked there. So then I
So
went
you
back.
worked with another gentleman. He actually ended up working for Hojo's, I think. He was either Holiday Inn or Hojo's. He was like the executive chef for the entire chain.
Oh, really?
He was from around here. And then there was the first woman chef I had ever encountered. She scared the crap out of me. She was.
won't mention any names, but-
she taught me so much. But she was like she took no prisoners.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you have to do that. And I was just thinking on the way over here about stressful jobs and situations. And that's pretty stressful, being the head of the kitchen. If you're running the line or if you're the executive chef, and around here, if you're the executive chef, you're a working chef. You don't sit at a desk. You work. And there can be quite a bit of stress. Many stories evolve from that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, many drinks and many stories. Someday we'll have
Right. So then after going around with that and having been in Florida, and I came back and I was working at the Days Inn, and what's his name that used to own the Skipper?
Oh, there was a bunch of them.
Denise. Ed Denise?
Ed Denise.
Yeah.
Yes, he and Armand Fernandez. I think from the Fernandez supermarkets, and there was another gentleman, another Portuguese gentleman as well. Yeah, there was like a trio.
Well, Ed Denise came into the Days Inn and convinced me to go to work for him, which was a horrible thing because he surprised his female chef that he had, and let her go and brought me in. And the whole staff was her team. They were her staff. So they left, and I was alone, and I didn't have a staff to bring with me. That was really difficult. And it's one of those times in my life where my husband said to me, you're talking, but you're not making any sense. Whatever you're saying is not real. So I didn't stay there long. I finally gave up, and I went from there. I went to the Hawthorne Country Club.
Worked there too.
Yeah, they were.
With Bill Schuler?
Bill Schuler and Ann Gagliardi were frequent diners at the Whaler, and they convinced me to go there. So I was there for 12 years, and that was my final job cooking. I stopped in '97.
Okay.
So in '94, I went to RISD and took the continuing education program for interior design. that's when I started painting again and getting into more artistic endeavors, because I had to take all the foundation classes, and
Yeah.
that got the ball rolling. So I did that, and I got out with my certificate and started working for a designer in Providence, and I worked with her for about 5 years, and then I said, well, it's time to go on my own. So I believe it was 2003. I started my own business and done that now for 20-some years. And after a while of doing that and designing people's closets and bathrooms and kitchens, I said, I should do something that's just totally for myself, that I get pleasure out of creatively. So I went back to RISD and took maybe 2 years of classes of art, painting.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you study with somebody in particular, or somebody that?
Susan Fasano.
Okay, I've heard that name. I think she judged. She's been a judge in 1 or 2 shows.
Yeah,
Right.
she's a member of the Rhode Island Art League and Art League of Rhode Island, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, and that was fantastic. I love that. It was a great class. There was no strict regimen to the class. You could do not what you want, but people came from different backgrounds, so it was great.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started hanging around with more artsy people, and I met people, and they said, do you teach? And I said, no. They said, well, you should go to the Portsmouth Art Guild and see how things go there. So I joined there, and then I met somebody, and they said, oh, you should join the South Coast Artist Group. So I did that. So that was almost 8 years ago. And after a year of being there, they nominated me or elected me to be the tour chair, which was a lot of organization, a lot of communication with the artist, getting their paperwork, getting them to that's like herding cats, and just to get them to send in their images and information and get ready for the tour. So I did that for 3 years, and then they nominated me to be the president, so I've been the president for a year and a half. At the same time, the Dartmouth Cultural Center was forming, and the one person in particular, Kathy Del Sordo, who was working to save the old Southworth building, had sent out a letter, and I received it and said, come to our first meeting. So we had a meeting at the Bullitt Center in Dartmouth, and I went to a next meeting, and you start out with the first meeting and there's 20 people there, and you go to the next meeting and there's 12 people there, and then you go to the next meeting and there's 7 people there. So we went through a whole process of forming a 501c3 so that we could go to the town and do a RFP to lease the building as a nonprofit, an in-kind lease. So that took a year to do that, with change of town administrator and other issues that were taking place with the building. But we finally got a lease in 18, September 1st of 18. So it's been a year and 3 months that we've opened and been running classes and concerts and exhibits and so on.
So, do you have any time to sleep?
No, that's what my husband says.
What drives you?
I don't know. I've always been a driven person.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things is when you work in a restaurant, as you know, it's long hours. You work the opposite of what most people do. You're working nights, you're working weekends, you're working holidays. And so I did that forever. And when I started out as a designer, I said, oh, great, I'm going to not work on weekends and I'm not going to work on nights. And it's the opposite. It's very demanding. Your time you're self-employed, so it's so easy to work when you don't want to or don't have to, because it's the weekend and you say, well, I'll just do a couple of hours, and next thing you know, the day's half over. So that's what drives me, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how working for yourself, the day flies by faster, but working for somebody else, it's, oh my God, yeah. What time is it?
Right.
It's the most bizarre thing. I have like an agenda, and it's just...
For me, it's the opposite. I'm going, oh no, it can't be that time. It's not 3 o'clock already, is it?
So you're painting, you're teaching painting, you're running the South Coast Artist, is it group, their official name?
South Coast Artist.
Just South Coast Artist. And who is that founded by?
That was founded by a group back in 16 years. This is our 17th year.
Okay.
So 17 years ago it started with Kelly Malukas and Dora Atwood and a few others. There was a core group.
Did it come out of Westport?
It came out of Tiverton and
Okay.
Westport. Yeah, they're kind of connected. And Dartmouth.
Uh-huh.
And then it involved Little Compton. And it was a very small group, and they decided that they would have open studios to generate sales, public awareness, and that lasted for about maybe 9 years, I think, or so, maybe less, because the Art Drive split off from that. The Art Drive developed just to be Westport and Dartmouth, and some of the founding members of South Coast split off and did that because they figured that they could do better if they just had Dartmouth and Westport as the focus instead of the four towns. As you know, Tiverton is like the hub of artists. There's four corners you can
Right.
shake hands with your neighbor and you're shaking hands with an artist. So they, at that time, about 10 years ago, South Coast Artists incorporated into a 501c3. And that's kind of when the ball really got rolling. And right now we're up to 150 members. And we have 75 artists that show during the Open Studio Tour. And we've tried to limit it to that because even though it's 2 weekends in the summer, the third weekend in July and August, it's impossible for someone to do 75 studios. You just can't visit 75 studios.
It's like wine country.
Yeah, it's just, and so even at 2 weekends, I think a lot of people join just because they can get they get, for one thing, they get their artist page on the South Coast Artists website with 5 or 6 images of their work and their contact information. We also have numerous events through the year that they get invited to attend, and just camaraderie of the artist is great.
Yeah, because one of the things that a lot of the artists always mention or complain about at some point in their lives is the isolation. Even in Hatch Street Studios, where there's 65 plus, I guess their number now, 65 plus, and yet they don't, they have, the only time they see each other is when they have their open studios and the other events
Or
where everybody
passing
comes
in the
out.
hallway or whatever.
Yeah, and as somebody said, well, that was the whole purpose, kind of, was to get a studio space so that you wouldn't be bothered by family and other things and, passers-by and such. But it does get to be, you need that critique, you need that pushback, feedback,
Absolutely.
whatever floats your boat. I believe Bill Kendall was on here. He's coming up, we're dropping his episode next Monday. He's episode
great.
7, and he said it's been quite successful for him.
He's done well.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got, the thing is, when people come for the tour, a lot of them are coming from out of town. It's just not local people. They're from all over. They're spending their summer here. It's summertime, so it's something to do. And he's in a beautiful location on in Westport, down on Brayton Point. So that's just wonderful. And Jeannie is just wonderful. She's just a riot. And so they're great people, and his art is incredible. He's a great painter.
Yeah, he is. We're going to have him come back because just at the end of the episode, because there's so many things that he and Jean have done, but he started talking about all he's interested in is the application of paint. So it's sort of a kindred spirit because I don't paint with any emotion, or I do the whole thing about the cold blood, and that I could see that we had another conversation going. So I'm hoping to get him back.
Oh, that's great.
So that we could do that. He said it was both he and Jeannie said it was very, very, very lucrative for them. They even made adjustments. They created pieces of work specifically for the tour. And that's great. What do you think? Do artists generally make out better during open studios than in other venues?
Well, for one thing, there's little overhead. It's not like putting it in a gallery where there's going to be a percentage taken out. So I think that's attractive for the artist. I think that a lot of people because it's 17 years, a lot of people make it part of their vacation when they're here, part of their summertime. Even if they are local, they put aside time for that. I've seen 7 years on the tour. I've seen many people repeat. Even if they don't buy anything, they're still out there taking the tour in. So that's a good thing. It's word of mouth, it's exposure. And the best part is when kids show up. This year I sold a painting to a 5-year-old. And the mother said to me, "This is not the first time she's been here." I said, "Well, I haven't seen her before." She goes, "When she was here before, she was in my belly." I said, oh, good. Now she's back and she can buy her painting. So
That's, I've had a couple of instances with young children that were just jaw-dropping moments where you see this child and they get it, where there's a couple of adults that that
they go, "What is that?"
Exactly.
Or the favorite one is, "What is that supposed to be?"
Yeah. Or my favorite, "What are you trying to say?" But when you see a little child that looks at your work, and it's almost like they're reading the Rosetta Stone or something, they understand the language. That's phenomenal. Now, the tour only runs in Dartmouth and in Westport?
Tiverton, Little Compton, Dartmouth, and Westport.
Okay, so it is Tiverton, Little Compton, Dartmouth, and Westport. Have there been any plans to expand it to, like, New Bedford?
No,
Fairhaven?
No, we've been asked to go over to Portsmouth or Middletown. We haven't been approached about New Bedford. The thing is that we're limited in the size of the brochure at this point. How big can the brochure be? It's geographically, it's difficult. Even if you're in the tour and you start out in Little Compton at Secundit Point, to make it to Padenham, it's a journey. It's a big journey.
Yeah.
And the concentration of artists in one area deflects people from going to another area because they can see so many artists in one space. And we've tried to stay away from group spaces because that's not a studio. That's not the point of the open studio tours. People will be educated to see how an artist makes money, how they make their living, what they do, and that's not a group space.
Yeah, I can see it. And it's also a private space. You're in the artist's private space.
Yes.
And then there's also that, I guess, clearing your head on a trip from one place to another. I was just sort of curious, if there were plans to, like, for example, say the month of July, the first week would be this town, sometimes combine two smaller towns. The next week would be this, like an agenda. So it's just like a rolling show,
Haven't
so
gotten
to speak.
to that point yet.
Yeah.
We are talking about how many members we have and how we can service them better. Because when we announce the tour, we have a date to sign up. We have an early bird date. So if you were on the tour last year, you get to sign up before anybody else who has never been on the tour. And it's so popular now that it's almost full by the time that period before opening up to the rest of the membership takes place. So we're making adjustments for that. We're figuring that one out so we can give more opportunities to the 75 artists that don't come on the tour. But some of them just wouldn't come on the tour. It's not their thing. They don't have the space. They don't have a studio at home or in a garage or shed, barn.
Basement.
Right.
That makes a difference. Now, going back to the Dartmouth Cultural Arts Center, what's in the future with that? It started off, as you said, 13 months ago?
Yep.
Approximately. Like with anything else, it has some hiccups and growing pains.
Absolutely.
It seems now to have steadied itself.
I hope so.
And, as with everything else, and it's the same thing with cooking, sometimes I'm going to make this, and then it develops a life of its own. It just evolves. Is that happening with the Dartmouth Cultural Center?
I don't think so. I think, I've worked pretty hard to keep the wheels on the bus or the bus on the road or however you want to phrase it. We had great success with our plein air event this summer, which we it was open to anybody who wanted to come from any part of the world could come and paint. It was a great day for Paid Air, for the whole village. It was a great day for the Dartmouth Cultural Center because it got a lot of attention. So I think that's got the ball rolling. We've had a really good 6 months or so. Now, we're coming into January and everything kind of comes to a screeching halt.
Mhm.
The village gets very quiet. People don't want to go out. But we're going forward with our classes. We have 17 classes offering starting in January 2nd through March, and then we have another program that will start in the spring. Hopefully that works out. We try to do as many free public events that we can, and we have to keep track of that for the town so they can see that we're meeting our obligation to the lease. And we did more than double than what they expected as far as that went with the Paid Name Chamber Music Festival come in there. That was standing room only. That was great. South Coast Artists last year, a year ago, we had 700 people come through the building.
Yeah.
We happen to be located where the shuttle bus from St. Mary's stops and the street is blocked. So people have to get off in front of our building. And it was fantastic. And we had the symphony, people from the symphony playing, which we will have again this year. So all of that's been great.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, since it's a startup and it's an infant, say, well, let's just wait and see. Let's just wait and see if they can do it. And I think we're doing it. I think it's momentum is there and it's going to happen.
Well, Paid Air, when I was young and I was working at Gulf Hill, some of my money would be spent at Ruth Atkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
I still miss that place. She was an artist herself. She had a little art shop there. She was just a gentle, kind person.
Mm-hmm.
There was Palmer Scott, who was I believe he lived he had the Palmer Scott Boatyard in New Bedford, but he had a place down there. Well, there was my cousin Ron Fortier,
Mm-hmm.
who had his studio down there. There was just a bunch of people down there. So there's always been quite a heritage of art down there, and it's great to see that it's still going strong.
Yeah.
Any aha moments or any oh my gosh moments, being involved with them? Again, you have an intent to do this one thing, and then something else pops up that was totally unexpected and very refreshing.
Well, one of the things is our board has grown, thankfully. It started out with alumni from Dartmouth High School who are 10 years older than me or so. So that's a good gap.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of difference between in 1969 when I was 15 or 1959 when they were 15. So there's a I remember a lot of changes just in the 60s, the late 60s for what was going on from haircuts to the whole Woodstock and all of that stuff. So I think that's one thing that's been an aha moment, is that these people have really stepped up and done what they can do. That's been great. I think having the merchants in the village get behind us, which they have done. We hold the Paid Air Business Association meetings there. So I'm at those meetings and I get to hear what the merchants have to say, and it's typical of any organization. When you call a meeting and if there's 100 people, 30 people show up. So if there's 30 merchants, 10 people show up or 14 people show up. And this year they reorganized again, and Stonegate Mortgage put forth the idea that if every merchant paid X amount of dollars to have the Christmas lights put on the buildings, it would be uniformity and it would look fabulous. And I responded that, well, we would love to do it, but we can't afford it. And they stepped up and said, we'll do it.
Well, that's pretty good.
So this past weekend they had an army of elves, men dressed up in elves
I saw
outfits.
that posted on Instagram, I think it was.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they went around the village and they put lights on all the buildings. It's just fantastic. It's magical.
Wow.
That's a magical thing.
Well, I can't believe if this has got to be the fastest conversation we've ever had. I just wanted to see how we were tracking, and we're actually starting to go a bit over on this,
no.
but this is great. But I'm going to wrap it up and definitely have you come. I mean, again, the invitation is always open to
Great.
anybody that wants to come back. When they have the time. The big scheduling issue is if we're dropping one, we're going to be dropping an episode every Monday. So we're already halfway through the year.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, by the time you hear this episode, it'll be probably March or April or something like that. So as we're growing, we're trying to figure out how to, well, first of all, if there are enough people who like it once a week, can we make it so that there's enough people who are going to want it twice a week?
Possibly.
And take it from there. And just thinking if we were to interview everyone in Hatch Street, for example.
That'd be years.
Yeah. And we still have tons of people that we haven't touched upon yet either. And then the return people. So this is a long-term project, that's for sure.
So tell me about Kilburn Mills. What's happening this weekend?
Kilburn Mills is they're the first ever Kilburn Art Expo.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind it is, from what I've deduced, is they want to have it as an art market. And as you know, art markets have gone international now.
Mm-hmm.
As with anything else, the marketing end of it as well. It's all about the marketing. It's all about timing.
Mm-hmm.
Success isn't about luck. It's all about timing. There's 100 slots. It's a massive, massive room. I've heard estimates of between 20 and 40. I don't know what, but there's enough artists to make it go forward, to help it go forward.
Great.
There's no commission. You pay your booth fee, and you get your 10 by 10 space. At some point in time, if they continue to do this, they should probably do 2 a year and then figure out, okay, which one is the best one.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a springtime one, and make it a regional. Go regional, because there are so many artists producing so much work. We have no idea. It's not like we're the IRS, but we have no idea how much work is being produced. And we have no idea how much work is being sold, but it's probably 5 to 1, just to throw a number out there.
Mm-hmm.
All this excess work that builds up, it has to be dumped someplace. It has to be sold somewhere.
Understood.
And the affordable art fair, there's so many art fairs now. Art Basel's going on right now in Miami, Art Basel, Miami. Some of them have become quite the, have that cachet and the panache and everything. That's for the high rollers. But they're selling work. And I don't know why art has been brought from the hallowed halls and temples of galleries down to pretty much a off-price table and a flea market. Mm-hmm. But for some reason it's working. And as you know, galleries are not surviving, commercial galleries. So there's definitely something in the air. So let's see what happens with this expo.
I hope it works.
Yeah, me
I
too.
really do. Yeah.
I'm going to devote a couple of days to it, plus just the setting up and such.
Mm-hmm.
Jill, I asked this of everybody before we sign off. If there was one thing that you could be remembered for, what would that thing be?
Oh my gosh. I don't know, that I'm dedicated. I'm loyal, and I work really hard. I'm a hard worker for certain.
Yeah, it shows. And it's funny because I've asked that question, and just recently, I don't know if you've heard about Mark St. Pierre, who
Yes,
was
I
a
did.
former
Yes.
faculty at UMass printmaking. My wife and I saw him and his wife Nicole at a party at Richard Connor's house, and Dr. Richard Connor's house. I didn't have a chance to get over there to say hello because we were, it's one of those swirling things that go on. You have to, it's like driving in heavy traffic, and then we got a call. We had to go tend to something for our daughter, and then to hear that he passed so suddenly, it was awful.
It's a
So
shock.
now that question is a little more poignant when I ask if there was one thing that,
Well, definitely I would want to it be known that I support artists completely. That I don't, there's no discrimination. I'm not cliquey. You know, I just want everyone who's an artist to do well.
that sounds good.
Yeah.
And with that, thank you, Jill Law, for coming here and speaking with us. This is Ron Fortier, the host of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by theartistindex.com. And with that, goodbye.